Welcome to the Work Positive Podcast with your host, executive coach, and culture architect, Dr. Joey Fawcett. Discover strategies and tactics that work positive as Dr. Joey talks with industry leaders who create a positive work culture that attracts top talent and reduces team turnover. Discover how you can create a work positive culture that increases productivity and profits. Here's your host, Dr. Joey.
Hey, Work Positive Nation, do you ever think of yourself as a superhero? What? You don't? Come on now. Oh, okay. Your boss expects you to be a superhero, but you're not so sure you are, right? Well, what if I told you that within you are superhero qualities? And that every day you can be a superhero in creating a positive work culture right there where you work. You don't have to participate in the Great Resignation. You don't have to quietly quit as if there really were such a thing. You can be an everyday superhero right where you are. What? You don't think you can? Well, after this episode of the Work Positive Podcast, you'll know you can, because the author of Everyday Superhero, I've always wanted to do that, almost like an NBA announcer. How you can inspire everyone and create real change at work is here. He is Duke University's Fuqua School of Business professor, a research fellow at Duke Corporate Education. He's such a slacker. I mean, he was only the founding member of the IBM Global Services Strategy and Change Consulting Practice. He only has written for HBR more times than I can count. The Financial Times, Strategy and Business, and Dialogue. He's published not only Everyday Superhero, the one we'll talk about today, but he's got another book as well. You're going to love this podcast. He came from Ireland today. Tony O'Driscoll is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Tony, I'm excited, in case you can't tell, to have you on today. Thanks so much.
Good to see you, Joey. How are you?
I am doing well. It turns out Tony and I hang out in some of the same places in terms of we really enjoy Eastern North Carolina barbecue. So if you want to email me at drjoey@workpositive.today, I'll be glad to give you a list of great barbecue restaurants that Tony and I particularly enjoy. So speaking of positive work culture, right? That would be positive if your boss served you Eastern North Carolina style barbecue every day.
Without
Tony,
a doubt.
tell us, what is an everyday superhero?
An everyday superhero is somebody who innately can figure out the qualities of others and create a deliberately developmental path for them to travel on.
Oh, wow. Let's unpack that a little bit. So someone who can innately, what does that mean?
I think that's it. I think it's somebody who truly, you've got two ears and one mouth for a reason, who can kind of listen and empathize and fully understand not just what somebody's good at. I mean, that's skills. And to a certain extent, I think a lot of what we do in hiring today, and I think we've gone the wrong way with that, with automation of hiring. And now we have kind of keywords, and then we have keyword writers, and then we have AI that reads the resumes and so on and so forth, that we've kind of over-rotated on this whole skill keyword bingo game. And what I'm finding, you mentioned the Great Resignation and this and that. Is it happening? Is it not? I think inflation, the economy, all that stuff has something to do with that. But at the end of the day, my one-liner on this, Joey, is meaning is the new money. I work with students all the time. And today, they really want to feel a sense of belonging in where they work. And they want to feel a shared sense of aspiration about what the work is seeking to accomplish. And it needs to be something bigger than yourself. It needs to have a just cause, as Simon Sinek would call it, or your vocation. It's your calling. I think that, I've been teaching at Duke for 20 years now. And certainly, back in my day, when we were talking about state and tech, and I was an engineer undergrad, it was largely driven by what job pays you the most money. If I'm being quite frank, that was kind of like, what major can I take that I can get into that will pay me the most money? That was kind of the algorithm that was at play when I was going through school. I don't see that today with students. I think it's more, what difference do I want to make, and where might I be given permission to do that? So that's why I think meaning is the new money, and aspiration and just cause is a new direction.
Meaning is the new money. I love that. So what I want to do is to find my place within the company and an attachment to a cause that's bigger than me, so that I know what I'm doing is connected to the greater good, and that the company is actually solving problems or creating solutions to something in the world. So an everyday superhero would help me find that. how do we attract that kind of talent, that top talent who's asking for that? You say you see it all over the place teaching it. How do we attract those persons who are looking for that connection with the greater good?
Yeah, this is interesting. So I'll go back to research from a good friend and colleague, Rob Cross. Rob and I worked together at IBM. He since then went to UVA and is now at Babson. And Rob looks at something called organization network analysis. He looks at there's a formal hierarchy and then there's an informal network. And we all know that the real work gets done in the informal network. There is a formal hierarchy and you do have a quote unquote boss. However, most of the work really gets done through and around that hierarchy through these informal networks. And so he was hired some time ago by one of the largest consultancies on the planet. And they said, look, we have this problem. We have no problem hiring the best MBAs from the best schools. That because of the brand name of this particular consulting firm. However, what we found is that some teams dramatically outperform others. So even though we're hiring from the best schools, when we get them through our training programs and they go out there and actually try to deliver strategies for clients, we're finding some teams are literally 10x, even more better, an order of magnitude better. And we don't know why. Could you help us figure it out? And Rob, through this work, found out that the answer is energy. Energy. So in doing this work, he uncovered that it wasn't about, how good I am at something. It wasn't about all of these things. It was, who do you get energy working with? And if you can pair people together who it's almost like together we're better. It's almost like, you pull me further than I'd be willing to go myself. There's all kinds of different ways that people defined what energy was, but there was energy. Wow. That was the primary metric. And then I go back further even to Jeff Byam. Jeff wrote a fantastic book called Zap, The Lightning of Empowerment. And in this particular book, there was a realm where you could go into this particular realm and you could see whether people were zappers or sappers. Now, zappers were people who they hit you with the lightning of empowerment, right? Whereas sappers were the ones that kind of were drains of energy, right? A good friend of mine, Jake Breeden, says, some people walk into a room and light it up. And then he says, some people leave a room and light it up. Zappers are the first. Zappers are the first, right? Sappers are the second. Now, the interesting thing in the research is that there's probably 2 to 3 sappers for every zapper.
Say that again. So
there's 2 to 3 sappers for every zapper.
Sappers for every zapper. Wow. We've got an energy deficit then.
We've got it. Absolutely. Now, that energy that is something that I call, it's not me, Denny Organ's the guy who I think originated. The idea is discretionary effort. So I think that the energy source that's locked up in any institution, organization, or company, university, whatever, is something I call discretionary effort. Discretionary effort is what you will do because you want to, not because you're told to. It's what you'll do because you're compelled to, not because you're commanded to. It's inside you. You can't not do it, if you know what I'm saying. There's some intrinsic motivational force that when you wake up, it's what comes into your mind at first. It's the thing you can't not do. Now, I think that the organizations today typically don't even recognize this energy source, right? They don't even try to understand what is that kind of intrinsic motivation that compels people to want to move forward. And I think if organizations could learn how to unlock that, they'd be unstoppable. And yet most of the discretionary effort that sits inside organizations today is basically locked up. It's locked up in engagement scores as low as only 15 to 20% of people, according to Gallup, show up. They get up early in the morning and put on their clothes and they're fired up to go to work. What that means is 80% of them, 4 out of 5, aren't.
Yeah.
If you think about that on a global scale, that's like, Russia, China, and Europe not showing up to work every day. Yeah. Right. It's literally that many people who are essentially, quote unquote, going through the motions. And I think that that's a huge shame. So what do you do to attract top talent? I think is you create that right sense of energy. You figure out how to unlock the discretionary effort. That requires that you have a superhero culture. And that superhero culture is not about me, the superhero. It's about the superhero and everybody else by knowing what it is that derives meaning for them. Right. And then that means you would move into a culture of aspiration. We're seeking this particular shared objective. Alignment, that we're aligned around it, but we're also complementary. It's not like we're all the same. It's that we bring a diversity of perspective around how to achieve that. Autonomy, which is now that I know that, it's go and do what you and only you can uniquely do to help achieve that aspiration, and accountability, and be true to yourself and to others in delivering what you say you will do, so that we can collectively move forward. So if you get those four, alignment around an aspiration, and then autonomy and accountability, you pick up one side of the stick, you pick up the other, what you get is what I call an instant enterprise, an enterprise that can instantly respond to any particular situation. We can turn on a dime. Right. And that's what we're really looking for, is an agile enterprise, because in today's world, the average age of a company over the last 25 years on the S&P, on the Standards & Poor's, has moved from 62 years old to 35 years old.
Wow.
Half of the Fortune 500 companies that were on the list in 2000 are no longer here today. So companies are kind of, they're suffering their own epidemic, if you will, and they're kind of falling off the board. And that's because they fail to understand how to unlock the discretionary effort within people. So at the end of the day, that's a very long-winded answer, Joey. I think it comes down to energy.
Because the tapping of that discretionary effort, if you will, must also be the key to reducing team turnover, because these teams wake up in the morning ready to go with their discretionary effort and bring their unique contribution to the relationships there at work and go do something significant.
That's right. And I think, we see this, and I look outside of business a lot just to try to understand these qualities, and sports teams obviously are one where you kind of see this kind of dynamic playing out.
You're not going to talk about Duke basketball here, are you?
I could if you wanted me to.
By the way, congratulations.
I'll give you one example. If you could, get some Carolina barbecue and eat it, but I'll give you an example of Shane Battier, right? So Shane obviously was revered in college, and everybody thought he's great. And then when he went to the pros, everyone's like, oh, he never quite panned out like we thought he would. He just never really didn't quite make it in the NBA, blah, blah, blah. His stats are terrible. Now, in terms of his stats, how many rebounds he had and how many this, that, and the other things, blocks and so on and so forth. However, if you stand back and you looked at every team that Shane joined, and you looked at the collective output, which is winning and getting into playoffs and getting into finals, it rose dramatically. So in this instance, we were measuring the wrong thing. We were measuring Shane's stats as opposed to measuring the overall performance of the team. So he was invisible individually, but he was indispensable collectively. That's a superhero in my language. You know what I mean? It's like their being there really mattered to the overall team. He was almost invisible through the kind of individual stats that we might look at. And I think it's those type of people. I call them catalysts. A catalyst from a the chemical reaction. A catalyst is something that kind of makes a reaction happen faster without overusing resource, right? It accelerates things efficiently, if you will. That's the definition of a catalyst. I think that's what the people who have discretionary effort, who are sitting within the organization, who truly have the followership of others. That's another thing Rob Cross looked at. When you look at organizational network analysis, you can ask a really profound question that kind of opened up a huge new window for me, which is, if your organization's about to go into some serious situation, I don't know, a merger and acquisition or a disruptive technology or a competitive move, whatever it is, you're about to hit the white water. Your company was, smooth sailing, but now it's about to go over the cliff kind of thing. Who would you follow? And it's very interesting. We've done this now many, many times, but on average, 30% of the people that the people say they would follow are not on any succession plan or org chart. Wow. Isn't that interesting?
30%?
30%.
That's a huge number.
It's a huge number. So what does that mean? Well, number one, it means that our kind of traditional leadership development succession planning is somewhat flawed, because 40% of the people are not on the succession plan. So 40% of those who are in the hierarchy are not even recognized as somebody I'd follow. And then there's 30% outside the hierarchy who are, right? So there's something. But the other thing is that you have an inbuilt cadre of leaders who people have already voted with their feet and said, I will follow. And to me, that's the definition of leadership. There's only one requirement for leadership to exist, and that's you have somebody who follows you. When I walk my dog every day, Reese is leading half the time, and I'm leading half the time. But so that's what leadership is. I'm following, right? And so I think followership is the precondition to leadership. And I think that by understanding who you'll follow, then if you go a little deeper, why would you follow? It's because of these same traits. It's that I listen, it's that I understand, I know what your just cause is. I can find a place for you to allow that kind of intrinsic motivation to come alive. I'm not going to dictate to you how to do it, but I'm going to create a patch for you to be able to exercise that because that's fulfilling for you. And guess what? In doing it, you're going to do it better than anybody else because you're intrinsically motivated to do it. And so the superheroes understand how to put together the multiple just causes into an overall whole. That's literally unstoppable. That's a very different mental model of what it means to be a middle manager than what we currently think about. We currently think about middle managers as the dinosaurs we need to get rid of with technology. I actually think that we need to flip that equation around. I think that we need to think of them as center leaders that are dynamos that propel the organization forward through human interaction.
Tony O'Driscoll is my guest today. Everyday Superhero is the book, Positive Nation. If you're on the Peloton or you're walking your Reese, or in my case, Maggie May right now, don't worry. You'll find the book in the show notes for this particular podcast on our website at workpositive.today. So it occurs to me listening to you that we traditionally are measuring the wrong things in culture. Because we're missing 30% of the people that are true leaders, right? And that the rest of the team, they're the everyday superheroes, and the rest of the team would run through a wall for them. How do we change the metrics by which we measure leadership and success on teams?
Yeah, well, I think, it's back to Kurt Lewin, and you get what you measure. And I think to a certain extent, we become beholden to metrics just because we become desensitized to them. I mean, I'll go back to the Gallup data, right? If you look at global engagement scores, and I am fully engaged at work. It means I'm fired up, I show up, I kind of, all know about the Pareto rule. 20% of the people do 80% of the work and so on and so forth. Yeah. Why are we resigned to that? Why are we like, oh gosh, we've moved our engagement scores from 15 to 20?
Why do we get excited about that?
I mean, it's kind of, why? So relative, 4 on 15 is a big move, but you've still gotten to 20. That means four out of 5 people who show up, who walk through your doors each day, are essentially figuring out which barbecue place to go eat at that night.
Yeah,
and that's their biggest decision of the day. You know what I mean? Right, exactly. The Walking Dead. And so I kind of feel Working Dead. Well, either way, I had a friend of mine he became the digital transformation officer for a very large financial services firm, and he used to refer to the company as Dead Company Walking. It's like it's still going through the motions. It doesn't realize it's walking towards a cliff, right? And I think to a certain extent we become desensitized a little bit. I think we need a whole scale redefinition of kind of everything. Number one, I think we have leadership wrong. We tend to think about leadership as a person in a position. We think about leadership as a noun, not a verb. I think every organization's got a CRM system, it's got an MRP system, it's got a supply chain system. It also has a leadership system. Whether we want to believe that or not, it's true. And if you think about
informal, right?
Correct. It's back to that informal network. And I think that just like a human body has a central nervous system, I think that the leadership system in an organization that is more like an organism than a machine. We tend to think of organizations as machines, like let's pull this lever or push this button and we'll get the outcome we want. That's not how organizations work today. They can't, because the world is far more complex than that. So now I think organizations are evolving into more like organisms, and we're dealing with digital Darwinism, and we're trying to figure out our niche and how to succeed. The other thing I believe very strongly from Charles Handy, a fellow Irishman, is that organizations are nothing but people. If all the people on the planet vanished today, there's nothing that organizations would do. They're just inert pieces of furniture or computers that, so literally humans breathe life into the organization. And I feel paradoxically that it's those that sit in the middle of the organization that are the ones that have the best perspective on how to propel the organization forward. They sit between strategy and results. They know if the strategy that's coming down from on high is not going to work before the people on high know. Because they're like, oh yeah, I'm hearing from the floor. Right. In my book, Everyday Superhero, that's the whole story. Is the mucks, the bosses, are kind of trying to impose change upon the masses. And Rizzo, every character has a name. Rizzo, and Reason. He's the voice of reason. He's like, this isn't going to happen in a month of Sundays. The people have already kind of dismissed this strategy as something that clearly wasn't developed by anybody who knows what's going on down here. And so they sit between strategy and results. And therefore, if there's a feedback loop that goes back up, it's like, hey, boss, let me tell you, let's not waste any money right now, because I can tell you it ain't going to work. And that's also very important, because 70% of strategies don't get executed. Well, they do. Organizations fail to make the changes required to implement their strategy 70 to 80% of the time. Now think about that. Think about that for a second, right? That's not because the strategies aren't good. It's because they don't get executed, or they do get executed. Right. The word executed in the English language means two things: to do or to kill. And unfortunately, the vast majority of strategies, no matter how beautifully crafted in the mahogany office with the same consulting firm I talked about earlier on, they don't get to see the light of day because people can make the organization stop or go. And they'll go, yep, I see your lips moving, Mr. And this ain't going to happen in a month of Sundays. No. And where are we going for barbecue tonight? Yeah. And this too shall pass. And 3 years from now, they'll be gone. And the next crowd will come in.
I'll outlast this initiative. Right. Correct. It's DOA.
Correct. And who knows better? Who has the early weak detection signal? To me, it's the center leaders. So it's kind of like, throw the flag, call BS, whatever you want to do, but say, let's save the money now because this is DOA, rather than letting it perpetuate, because that's a hugely expensive endeavor, right? So I think the early, and then secondly, is so you sit between those center leaders. They sit between strategy and results, right? They sit between aspiration and alignment. They can tell you straight away that the strategic aspiration, there's no alignment around it. And now that happens for two reasons. Either people don't know why. They don't know why we're doing it. They don't know the reason, right? Or secondly, they disagree with it. They don't believe it can actually be accomplished. The center leader is in the best position to understand that. Secondly, center leaders, they sit between the culture and the people. They know what the culture can absorb and what the culture will absorb, and they know what it'll reject. And more specifically, they know which people are the people they would need to put on this team in order to make it happen in the first place, because it goes back to they're closer to the people, understand their sense of meaning, and can kind of put together the right team that's got a big battery full of discretionary effort that would be unstoppable to go after it. So at the end of the day, I'm a huge believer that center leaders are not dinosaurs. They are dynamos. And if you don't have the right central nervous system or leadership network of center leaders who really have the pulse, the heartbeat of the business, front and center, you're DOA no matter what.
So you've just described my organization, right? I'm a listener, and you've just described my organization. How do we free or empower these center leaders to communicate up and down and be heard?
That starts with senior leadership.
Okay.
So unless and until senior leadership is willing to let go to grow, none of this happens. And let go of what? Let go of control.
Ba-da-da-da.
Right. And so
there.
That's right. And so it takes a very enlightened leader to recognize that the mechanics and dynamics of the business are such that they don't know everything. Right. In fact, if you think about the organization, I kind of think about it like, if you think about the organization, you look at it like a hierarchy, you can see it like this, like a pyramid, and the chief executive's on top. But if you go around and you look at it from the top down, it's almost like a whole set of concentric rings. You know what I mean? The CEO sits in the middle, and there's all these layers of management before you get out to the coal face, where the company is engaging with a customer, the company is engaging with a supplier, the company is engaging back into the supply chain, and the company is engaging with even perhaps with competitors. And the real action is at the edge of the enterprise. The real action is at that coal face, or that interface between the firm and whatever stakeholder you're dealing with. And in a way, the chief executive is largely cocooned through layers of kind of bureaucracy from what's happening. So there's a dampening effect. And as fast as organizations have to move today, if everything has to go through all those layers and then up into the lap of that chief executive, and then a decision needs to be made and it needs to get pushed back down and out, it's too late. The market's already moved.
Again,
Peter Drucker has a great saying about this, Joey. Wait a minute. Yes, here we go. It's always good to have a prop. Joey, did you know that bottlenecks are at the top of the bottle? Think about it that way, right? So I think today organizations are knowledge-based organizations, right? And so essentially they're decision factories. So the companies that succeed the best are the ones that decide the fastest and then respond the quickest. That doesn't happen by having something at the edge come into the hierarchy, move up through the hierarchy, wait for the next board meeting, have everybody decide, and then transmit it back through the layers of management and back out to the edge. That's a losing game. That's a losing game.
Before it gets to the top.
Correct. And sometimes it doesn't make it to the top, depending on how amenable those at the top are to hearing bad news. So there's a psychological issue there, which is, do I want to risk my job to be the bearer of bad news to the person, living cocooned within 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 21 or 56 layers of kind of, bureaucracy.
Right. Because how many, 5, 6, 7, sometimes a dozen layers of gatekeepers in between that center leader and the C-suite. So you can't get the information back up there if you want to, because there are too many turf battles and too many people protecting their little kingdoms.
But that falls back on protecting my position.
Yes.
See, this is again back to the definition of leadership. So I think I think of leadership as a system, LAAS, leadership as a system. And the system is a network, not a hierarchy. And the network is defined by those who are closest to the particular decision that needs to get made and who know who to attract around that decision, who would be the best equipped to answer it. That comes from diversity of perspective, being able to see things differently, and also then intrinsic just cause to be able to contribute, to want to contribute to this. Google innovation is a big thing at the moment, and everybody's saying we need to innovate more. What are we going to do? And Google has this kind of 20% rule. They used to. Now they're starting to lay off, so they're questioning this whole 20% rule thing.
Working.
45 different cafeterias inside the Googleplex. And I think that's one part. There's a policy piece that says, yes, we want you to, but there's a whole another part where you need to understand who should come together around this, and how might we, take 3 or 4 different ideas and push it forward in a meaningful way. That's where I think the center leader really, really shines, is understanding how to coordinate capability and energy around endeavor, and to do that in a very opportunistic way without having to ask permission. That's the other thing. What does letting go of control mean? It means that people out there at the edge will be making choices without asking you permission.
They're empowered to go into
correct. Now, empowered is an important word, and I'd love to, if you'll indulge me here in a little history lesson. Mary Parker Follett, one of my favorite organizational psychologists, and she wasn't called that back then, in 1914 wrote the following words.
Wow.
1914. Leadership is not defined by the exercise of power, but by the capacity to increase the sense of power among those led.
Oh, wow.
You see? So, I think that has gotten condensed down into the word empowerment. But I think when you unpack it, certainly through her perspective,
that's rich.
I think that's what a center leader does. A center leader does not exercise his or her power, but they increase the capacity for others to feel, right? That they have the autonomy to go do what they and only they can do, because they feel they have a just cause to be able to do that. And accountability ships with the freight. You know what I mean? I can't not do it. It will get done because it's just so.
Yeah.
Right. And we've all had this feeling. We've all had this feeling. Csikszentmihalyi, is the most famous to have talked about this, but it's flow. It's that sense of flow.
Right.
Now, I was on a podcast yesterday, and people noted the irony of this, but I'll do it just for giggles. But I said, all of us would love to know what it feels like to leave the court, and go up in the air and dunk the ball like Michael Jordan with our tongue hanging out. And yes, I did say Michael Jordan. If you just look at that player and you just look at that experience,
though, right?
I know, that's what I'm saying. That's the irony of it all. But that's flow. It's like, and actually, if you look at flow is a very interesting thing in terms of how it works in our brain. Is that there's a point in time where you stop thinking. Yeah. You stop weighing things out. You stop and you just do it. Back to Nike, just do it. Like, that's the state of flow, is when you've taken everything into account, but now, boom, you're just in execution mode. And by this, I mean doing, not killing. You are executing what you've seen in your mind's eye. I feel that kind of flow is driven by true center leaders who are superheroes. And who recognize the superhero in others and create the milieu to allow those superpowers to emerge around something that's a just cause. So So it's a very human. I wrote in the book, the book itself, Everyday Superheroes, there's a framework inside of it, the people-centered transformation. And my advocacy is that we need to be very, very people-centered in how we think about leading and how we think about changing moving forward. My one-liner on that is, I think we put the tangible cart in front of the emotional horse. So whenever we're going to try and change something these days, there's a new CEO and they're going to put in a new structure, or they're going to put in a new process, or they're going to put in a new technology that has a process, and we're going to measure our compliance on the use of this particular tool. And when we get to 100%, we'll achieve nirvana and the stock will go up.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. That's what I mean by the structural, the things we can measure, back to your question about those things we can measure. We're 50% implemented on blah, 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 or our compliance is such and such and so and so, without ever asking anybody why. And the research is super clear on this. Martin Reeves and his team at BCG, look, first and foremost, human beings don't resist change, right? We're here. The dinosaurs aren't. We're adaptive creatures. We have a prefrontal cortex. We're Homo sapiens. We've learned how to actually, we're not as strong as lions. We're not but we learn how to climb a tree. So we inherently are a species that has survived everything because we adapt. So there's no question that human beings, they don't resist change. What they resist is being changed. They resist being changed.
Okay.
Right. And so if you put the structural cart in front of the horse, you're saying you will now be in this box, not that box. You will now adhere to this process, not that process. You will now use this software, not that software. And what you get is malicious compliance. You get, okay, you're the boss of me.
That's right.
I will do exactly what you did. Think about this just for a second. Right? Imagine for 1 second that every single person in the organization, whatever organization you're in, did exactly everything that was written on their job description and not one thing more. Not one thing more. And would expect full compensation for doing that. Just think about how insane that actually really is, if you think about it. Right?
Yep.
So there's obviously something beyond the task. Yes. There's something, and that's what I'm trying to get back to. I'm trying to get back to, don't get rid of middle managers because they're dinosaurs. They're the human sinew. They're the ones who weave the human fabric together to unlock discretionary effort. And there's no AI tool out there that can do that. So if we want to become more compliant around task, perhaps we should get rid of middle managers and cut out that layer and help the balance sheet look good so our stock price can go up. But if we want to have a vibrant community of people with a shared aspiration and a just cause who are unstoppable because they can't not do it, then don't get rid of middle managers.
So
turn them into center leaders.
We hold shareholders and stakeholders in equal regard.
100%. I mean, I think that's one thing, a lot of students, Duke is quite a well-known school in terms of, as a business school, it's well ranked and so on and so forth. But the thing is, it's a very young school. Our original dean still walks the halls, so to speak. So we're new to the game. And when we came to the game with a stakeholder perspective. Duke Fuqua has always been a stakeholder perspective, not a shareholder perspective. So a lot of us who are faculty are kind of attracted to that particular positioning. I think the world's moving our way. I think, with what we've seen with the Business Roundtable, some of the data we're seeing now coming back about, the trickle down, the Friedman kind of 1970s argument that Thatcher and Reagan kind of took hook, line, and sinker, doesn't necessarily show. And I think there's a fair amount of empirical evidence now. I would point to Roger Martin's "More is not enough" being the best treatment, I think, of just looking at that and how we've gone into a power law distribution where we've got massive inequalities and wealth is accruing to the wealthier more and more and more. And that's not a good outcome. So I do feel that organizations kind of lost their way too. They became instruments for people to, to have paper entrepreneurship.
Right.
Yeah, let me buy it. It's those who have wealth above wage who can invest in the likes of Facebook that truly generate wealth, whereas those who just earned a wage are probably no better off now than they were 20 years ago. And that's happening on the back of businesses or enterprises where more of the energy is around the stock price than there is what the strategy is, who we're putting to work, what we're hoping to achieve. And so I'm really hoping that, we're seeing a big revival now of purpose Ranjay Gulati, I think, has done the best work on this recently out of Harvard, where it's like, it's back to that meaning, right? You could go all the way back to Dan Pink, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? In his book, Drive.
Mm-hmm.
I call that amping people up. Discretionary effort, how do I amp people up? Purpose, I have to understand their sense of purpose and how it connects to my organization. Mastery and autonomy, I need to give them the power to be able to do what they want to do, and not go for them. Just let them do it, right? So that they can develop mastery. So if you do that, you got this positive, virtuous triangle of purpose, mastery, autonomy that drives up discretionary effort. The alternate to that is fear, reward, and recognition. I'm your boss. I have position power over you. I have coercive power over you. If you don't do exactly what I say, even though you won't like it, then I can damp down all of that intrinsic motivation that you have. Yes. And I think, the evidence is pretty clear right now. 85% is SAP and 15% is ZAP. I think we need to completely reverse that equation. And that happens through leading from the middle out. I think that leadership is a system. It's a network of relationships, and it happens by leading from the middle out around the areas that matter. And the people who are the most important nodes in that network are not the ones at the top of the hierarchy, but the ones in the middle.
The center leaders, right? So it sounds like to me the center leaders are the bankers of meaning, because that's nice. The money.
I like it. Yeah, I think that's right. I like that. I'm going to steal that one. Theft is the most sincere form of flattery there, Joey.
Yeah. Tony O'Driscoll is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Tony, man, this is thrilling and so stimulating to hear you share so much information that we can directly apply today. Somebody in Work Positive Nation is going to want to get in touch with you. We know they can go to Amazon or wherever fine books are sold to pick up Everyday Superhero. Is there a website we can go to?
Yeah. So most of my writing and a lot of my talks I've put up on complexsimple.com, COMPLEXIMPLE, complexsimple.com. Most of my work over the last 5 or 6 years has kind of been trying to find the simplicity on the other side of complexity as it relates to organizations and leadership. Most of my stuff can be found there.
Yeah. And that URL, Work Positive Nation, is in the show notes, so you can go right there and click it. If, again, you're walking Reese, or in my case, Maggie May. By the way, Maggie May and Reese might be related because she leads me around too.
There you go.
So Work Positive Nation always wants to know one thing from my guest, Tony. And that one thing is, what can Work Positive Nation do today, right now? What one thing can they do to start creating a positive work culture now?
Well, I would honestly point to the book, because what I spent 2 years really digging into it, and I have a 10. Here's what I'll say: take your PCT pulse, and that's a 10 questions. Our leaders communicate clear and concise, consistent, compelling narrative that makes purposeful, passionate, and emotionally resonant case for change. That's one. There's 10 questions. Okay, right? And by being very clear about your leadership inside your organization. I don't mean leaders, I mean leadership. So that could be the CEO all the way through the leadership system. You can kind of get a pulse and kind of figure out the chiropractic of, oh, wow, maybe we need to work on the discretionary effort part, or we need to work on the agency part, or we need to work on the catalyzing part. So what I tried to do over the 2 years that I was doing the research for this book was kind of distill it out into the 10 diagnostic questions that matter the most. And that's called the PCT pulse. So that would be the first place I would start, is to try to figure out, where might we need a little bit of leadership chiropractic in our organization to unlock discretionary effort.
All right. And that's in the book, Everyday Superhero.
Absolutely.
Which you can get, Work Positive Nation, wherever fine books are sold. Tony, thank you so much. I've learned so much today. I appreciate your sharing not only of knowledge, but of wisdom. Because, man, that's what we're really looking for today, right? Is to understand where lies the simple on the other side of the complexities, so that we can begin putting them into practice today and moving our organizations in ways that they fulfill their mission, and we as individual contributors make our unique contributions and find our alignment of our actions with our purpose for being here. So thank you so much. Tony O'Driscoll, Work Positive Nation. Go get your copy of Everyday Superheroes today. Tony, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Joey. It's fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Please share this podcast with your friends who are HR and small business leaders so they can do one thing today to create a positive work culture that increases productivity and profits. I'd like to give you a free Work Positive course just for listening. It's called Something to Talk About, and it's transformed the work conversations of so many people all over the world. Get your free copy when you go to workpositive.today/something to talk about, and you can start transforming your conversations today. Remember, it pays to work positive.